Rehabilitation Committee. It is Tuesday, January 24th. The month is flying by. Our first issue this morning is the confirmation of Commissioner Jennifer Morrison, who lives in not Colchester, no. So welcome, Jen. Good morning, and we have your resume, but tell us a little something about yourself. And I know you've been on this job since July, so you have a long past knowledge of a lot of different departments. You led Colchester for some difficult times. Colchester Police Department did a great job. I can remember this little story. You had just become Colchester Police Chief, and my wife and I were at McDonald's, and we were sitting in the parking lot, and they had a call from McDonald's. And who showed up? But the chief herself to address that. My wife reminded me that all the time. The chief herself came over to address the little concern they had in the McDonald's parking lot. So anyway, go right ahead. Thank you.
Well, good morning and thank you, Senator Mazza and members of the committee. I can't see you, but I assume you can see me. I'm just getting a black screen that says State House, room 3.
Shall we wait a minute?
Yeah, let's wait a minute so you can see us, and then we can.
Where's the tablet?
There.
Oh, hi. There you are.
There we go.
So yes, thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to testify remotely. My family circumstance does not allow me to be there today. My mother just entered hospice care this weekend, so we are holding a close vigil. So my name is Jennifer Morrison, as Senator Mazza said, and I moved to Vermont in 1990 when I became a young police officer with the Burlington Police. I did not intend to stay in Vermont. It was meant to be a 2 or 3 year stint as a police officer, and then I had plans to become a federal agent back in the Washington, D.C. area from whence I came. But I loved it. I fell in love with it. I started coaching at Rice High School. I fell in love and got married and had kids, and all of a sudden 23 years had flown by and I was eligible to retire from Burlington. I was currently serving as the deputy chief in Burlington when the opportunity to serve as Colchester's police chief came along. So I went to Colchester PD and enjoyed just over 5 years of an amazing experience in a wonderful community. Very different municipal policing than it was in Burlington, but really a tremendous experience for me to grow as a leader. And then I retired. I thought I retired for real in 2018. And that didn't stick apparently. In 2019, at the end of 2019, I believe it was, Mayor Moreau Weinberger asked me to return as the interim police chief in Burlington, which I did starting right over the holidays at the beginning of 2020. And I served as the interim chief in Burlington during a time of considerable turmoil for 6 months. And then in October of 2020, then Commissioner Sherling asked me to join the team at DPS. So this is my third role in the last 2.5 years at DPS, 2 1/3 years. I started out as the executive director of policy development, and then I became the deputy commissioner, and I became the acting commissioner in, I believe it was June, and then I was appointed by the governor in July or August of 2022. So here I am.
Great background of all of the things you've done. And we're very fortunate to have you as a Commissioner of Public Safety. It covers a lot of the area. I didn't realize how many different areas in the state of Vermont, knowing what it covers. How many state police officers do we have? State police alone?
We're authorized for 330. We currently are carrying, there's a lot of different ways to count the vacancies. For instance, the 7 recruits that are in pre-basic right now only take up 1 job spot until they are out on their own. So if we count actual humans, we have approximately 43 vacancies right now. But if you look on the HR books, you'd see 6 more than that, because they consider all the recruits as 1 position until they graduate.
Okay.
So we have approximately 43 vacancies right now. Things are not, our attrition versus intake is not as dire as it was in 2021 and 2022, but we are still losing more people annually than we are hiring. And we're hoping to turn that around in the August class. We're hoping for a large cadet class in August.
The big thing I'm waiting for is a new barracks opening up in Williston. I've been on that for 20 years, and finally it's coming. It should be open this fall, I guess, or sometime, and that'll be get out of that place in Williston that's been just an old garage and a barn and everything else. So finally, you're gonna have a nice spot to work out of. Which you and now throughout the state, we have some pretty good barracks all over the place. All over. Questions from the committee?
I want to go back to the around staffing, which in all areas a challenge, but certainly law enforcement, and some of it is certain, even just the current environment and some of the attitudes toward law enforcement, and then some are shedding old practices and dealing with kind of some residual issues. When you're talking about when people are leaving the police force, and I, we're focusing on law enforcement, but obviously the department is much bigger than that, and so I want to recognize you have the emergency management, you've got your, I believe, fire and safety is part of, so but certainly staffing has been an issue, and encouraging people to go into law enforcement and what law enforcement is and how sort of that culture that's being reevaluated. Are you losing the troopers to retirement, or are they leaving law enforcement entirely? In other words, who's your major competitor? And I know you just negotiated an 8% salary increase, and so I'm assuming that might have a beneficial impact on retention as well.
Yes, ma'am. I think it already has shown to have a beneficial impact, that settling that contract. We have multiple senior leaders who are eligible to retire by virtue of turning age 50, who have indicated a willingness to stay for another year or two. And I think it's in large part due to that. We lose people to a variety of circumstances. Some leave law enforcement altogether. Some go to federal agencies or other law enforcement agencies. Some separate because they needed to be separated from the agency or get fired, or there's all sorts of manner of attrition that happens. Right now, our primary one in 2021 and 2022 has been retirement or leaving the field altogether. I do appreciate that you mentioned the rest of DPS. DPS is an incredibly, I marvel at the breadth and depth of things that happen in our shop. We have the Vermont Forensic Lab, which is sort of a little land unto itself, but they do incredible work at the lab. And as you mentioned, Vermont Emergency Management, which covers all manner of things that people probably don't realize are in their wheelhouse, including at any given time, hundreds, if not approaching 1,000 grants that we sub-grant through to communities on everything from emergency relief to Homeland Security grants, all kinds of grant streams that are managed through there. The Division of Fire Safety, of course, licenses tradespeople, inspects buildings and elevators, runs the Fire Academy and a variety, public education, a variety of other missions. The Vermont Crime Information Center, of course, is integral to records checks, background checks, and reliable information being shared with the feds. Our radio technology shop is responsible for all the radio infrastructure for state law enforcement and for AOT. So those plow trucks you were talking about talk to each other over infrastructure that we manage and maintain. And of course, our Division of Administration and Finance, we couldn't do anything without them. So there's a lot more to DPS than the Vermont State Police, although they are certainly our most visible and public-facing part of the team.
Question, yes.
Fire and safety includes the plumbing board and the plumbing license.
Yes, electricians and plumbers. I think there's, sorry about that. I think there are other people in there, but I don't happen to know the entire list without consulting with my director. That's that it's an interesting thing that Mike Sherling passed along to me that I have found to be very true, in that the directors are really the career professionals. They are the subject matter experts. And the commissioner and the deputy commissioner are kind of, if history plays true, they're there for 2 or 3 or 4 years, 5 years, but it's the directors who really are the subject matter experts on their shops, and that'll be there 10, 20, 15 years, whatever it is. And we're blessed with an incredibly good team.
One area that has plopped right back in our lap, and that's dispatch.
Yes, ma'am.
And Paul White was chair, and so the report that's come back is really talked about what should be the, for the legislature to debate exactly where we go from here, the role, the extent to which somehow we have uniform standards, and maybe we have regional entities, but that we have some consistency. So I'm just bringing that up because that's going to be something that is a subject of discussion in terms of what should that state role be, even if we are using that regional and looking at how your dispatch services would be limited to state police functions. And so I guess we're stay tuned on that, but I think our Senate Gov Ops Committee, I've talked to the chair because we have to figure that out. We have money there, and I guess none has been released, but I'm getting into a different area, but.
No, that's okay, because it's a really important area. And I think the moment is now. Like, we can't keep kicking the can down the road.
Oh, I agree. So
I think there's a fundamental question that the governor wants the legislature to answer, which is provision of emergency services dispatching a fundamental responsibility of government? And if the answer is yes, then we have to go in a different direction than the path we've been on the last 3 years. The path we've been on for the last 3 years is much more of a capitalistic society where we find the right type of regional scheme for that region, and that the state does not impose regulations on how they operate their centers. And we see that already in existence in Vermont. We have the Lamoille County Sheriffs, we have St. Albans PD and Shelburne PD, and Hartford PD, all of whom operate currently as de facto regional dispatch centers, and they all have a different pricing scheme. They all have a different governance, and they work just fine. So we're at that fork in the road where we've been on a path for 3 years, and the money is there. Joint Fiscal Committee has authorized $2.2 million for us to put out on the street, although we're taking a pause right now before we do that. And we have been given money to
made the motion
hire a technical consultant and a project manager. And those RFPs just closed last week, so we have candidates there.
Okay.
So
well, that's a 2.5 then that we approved. And anyway, it's going to have to be an interesting discussion. What, how much variation? On the other hand, you don't want to end up like we had with 9/11, where you had systems that couldn't communicate with each other. And there's so what you have to have is some fundamental standards. So the board said it has to come back for debate, and so you will be part of that debate, I'm sure.
And it's expensive to see small communities, and nothing we're going to solve here today, but to bring part of the discussion. I was in an unincorporated towns on Saturday, and they have 40 people, and they're spending $15,000 a year for dispatching out of 2 different services. And it's something that they can't afford, but they can't afford not to have it.
Right.
And as discussed with them, it'd just be nice to get them out of the mix of trying to make those hard choices and just dial 911 and then have that taken care of.
Well, that gets into the larger issue, because we've got those who are paying, and they don't think it's fair that those who aren't paying should, and those who aren't paying want to continue not to pay. So it really is a thorny discussion, but I don't want to focus on that so much as coming into a new agency. While you're there, what will be your priorities in terms of what you feel organizationally? I mean, work is probably underway regarding how law enforcement is carried out, sort of the culture, et cetera. So I wondered if you could just speak to sort of from your perspective as now head of the agency, what are going to be your priorities?
Well, if we're talking specifically about law enforcement, we certainly will continue to focus on workforce development, changing the narrative around policing, establishing the fact that it is an honorable and noble profession that is of great service to citizens and visitors alike, and that it's an exciting career. It's never the same day twice. We certainly are focusing on diversity within the ranks, trying to recruit more women. I'm sure you're aware that we're involved in the 30 by 30 pledge. We're the first state police organization to sign on to 30 by 30, where we are shooting to have 30% of our sworn workforce be women by the year 2030. We also certainly want to have more diversity of all types of race, of background, of experience and worldview, of all manner, because it's important that we represent the public that we serve. So workforce development is more than just putting meat in the seat. It's about getting the right people in the job for the right reasons. And that is certainly going to continue to be a priority. I'm also committed to being as transparent about our operations as possible. I think an example of that is the work that we're working on methodically on the heat map, the public-facing heat map around giving a visual depiction of not just police calls for service in a community, but also layers of other information that we are pulling from different data streams that historically have never been represented together in the same space, such as overdose deaths, visits to the emergency department that are for overdoses but don't result in death, and other types of data streams that we're pulling to try and better inform where there are hotspots in our state and where interventions or more resources might be needed. So transparency and continually and always maintaining and enhancing public trust are very important. I could go on because I have a lot to say about policing, but you probably don't want to hear all of it.
I just want to echo the other comments. Living in Chittenden County, I've admired from afar your leadership in Colchester and Burlington, so I'm really excited to see you in this role. My question somewhat goes back to the regional dispatching question. The VTrans has been reporting recently and presenting to us some really exciting things they're doing to make our roads more intelligent. So intelligent transportation systems tracking the conditions of the roads, the temperature of the roads, as well as congestion based on cell phone signatures. I'm kind of curious from your vantage point, are you seeing more opportunities or are you already working really closely with VTrans in the dispatching that the state does have a hand in, or are there opportunities to better integrate a lot of those systems for real-time recognition of managing and tracking where there are congestion, where there are road closures, where there are severe accidents through our intelligent transportation systems?
My understanding is that information is already communicated to our dispatch centers and that information is shared in near real time. So I'm not sure that I have contemplated an application of that data beyond the fact that it informs traffic direction and control, potentially crash management if it's related to a crash. But we work very well with our partners at AOT, as you can imagine, because we share the communications infrastructure. And our troops who are out on the road, all our employees who are out on the road are pretty well in touch with what's going on with their AOT partners. If there are applications of their data about roadway conditions that we could generate into some sort of predictive analysis, then that would be a fertile area to explore as road conditions deteriorate, that triggers some sort of repositioning of state police apparatus. That could happen. But I have not contemplated a further use of their data beyond the fact that they inform us of where the road conditions are poor and where they're seeing congestion and crashes.
Yes.
Yeah, Commissioner, you brought up the heat map, and since I represent Barry, I feel like necessary just to mention the comment in
Mixed response.
the paper. It's just, I don't want to give you a hard time about it, but I'm giving you a hard time.
You can, but it was one sentence out of a 30+ minute interview.
Yeah.
And I had said it strung it together with whether you're planning to go out to dinner in Barry, or you're thinking of shopping in this town and doing this in that town. It was one of like 4 towns that I mentioned in a statement, and that is the one that got cherry picked. And
Always
I
the
mean,
way.
I am meeting with the mayor on.
Politicians, we're used to that too, getting misquoted. but-
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
meeting.
it was,
with the mayor.
it was noticed by the people of Barry, just so you know.
Yes, I understand. And my apologies to the people of Barry, but honestly, if the people of Barry are offended, I would ask them to look at their domestic violence rate, because that's what's blowing up their portion of the heat map.
Yeah.
And that's something that the reporter specifically asked, why are you including domestic violence? And I was like, why wouldn't we? Because if we continue to not talk about it and pretend like it doesn't impact the quality of life in our community, then we're ignoring the fact that children who are exposed to domestic violence are going to school and having behavior issues, and the victims are more likely to be victimized again. And so it was absolutely no shade on Barry. It was multiple towns that were mentioned, but I do recognize that didn't play well when people read that. And I am meeting with the mayor this week, so I'm sure he's going to want to take me to the woodshed for it too. And that's
Well, I appreciate it.
okay. That's part of it's part of my job. I mean, I
Sure.
speak honestly. That's the way I've always been. And sometimes people don't like it.
And if that's what the data is, I like the idea of being transparent about the data and letting communities learn from that. So I think it's a good project, but
That brings up an initiative that we started a couple of years ago, and actually you now have Morning Fox working for the department, and that was embedding mental health workers because so many of the calls, in fact, are really need a mental health response rather than a law enforcement response. Could you just, since it's something that's only a couple of years in place, from your perspective, how is it working? My understanding is that the officers really like having that resource, but just wondered what your perspective was on it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. It's a great program. We have positions for all 10 of the state police field stations to have an embedded worker. Those workers are actually employees of the local designated agency. They are not our employees, but they work with our troopers. They ride in cars with troopers, or they meet them on scene. There's a variety of ways that collaboration happens. And it has been great for our troopers to have some expertise, to learn new skills. We've seen some great success stories coming out of incidents that previously we really only had a law enforcement tool for, and now we have a mental health expert on scene. There are some challenges, again, with workforce in that there are certain field stations that have had a worker and then they lose that worker, and it takes months and months and months to fill the position because across that sector, they're having trouble hiring, just like we're having trouble hiring police officers. So the great news is that we have the positions. The bad news is there's a couple of them that aren't filled. And we hope to double the number of positions in the next couple of years because we are seeing such a positive outcome from having the embedded workers. We're hoping to have 2 per field station in the relatively short term.
That's helpful. Thank you.
With the help of Senator Kitchell appropriations a few years ago, we put a fence around $2.5 million a year for cars, and that's been a good program. We really are proud of that. And at least prior to that, the cars were being used many, many years and over mileage, and at least now we have a system of their safe automobiles. So we really like that program. Do they have to retire at 50 years old? That's our law, right?
Mandatory got moved to 57.
Correct. It's not mandatory. They're eligible if they have the correct number of years of service at 50, but we're seeing a few stay beyond 50. And honestly, maybe before I turned 50, I wouldn't have said this, but when you are at 20 years in, you are really just hitting your stride. You are reaching the apex of your experience, your maturity. And I'm really delighted to see people stay another year or 2 and share the institutional knowledge and remain committed to the work. And Senator, I just want to go back to what you said about the vehicle replacement transportation funds. It's $2.1 million that comes to our budget each year. And that has been so much smoother than the old system and is so greatly appreciated. I would be remiss if I did not mention that $2.1 million for cars 3 years ago does not buy the same number post-COVID. So we are having to supplement that quite a bit. I believe it was to the tune of about $500,000.
But we got the chair appropriation, the vice chair appropriations right here, so I'm glad we brought that. Yes, go ahead.
One more thing on dispatch, I hear what you said about the governor wanting kind of the legislature to make the decision, but I think because it gets into all the different towns and different forces, the fire departments, police stations, ambulance and everything, that what I was kind of hoping is that the administration or the commissioner of public safety would be taking the lead on saying, this is what needs to be done. Because I think we kind of need leadership on it, because I'm afraid that we're going to continue just to get bogged down in it unless.
And that's what GovOps is going to do.
Yeah, well, hopefully GovOps will provide that leadership, but just putting my 2 cents in that.
Agreed.
I
I agree that that is desirable, and I will carry that message back to the governor's team. The short answer from my perspective is we are prepared to lead the charge whichever direction we go. And what my personal preference is does not really matter in the long run. And I think that we could ask the 251 communities, and then if you put police, fire, and EMS in most of them, you've got like 650 stakeholders. I know they don't all have a fire department or an EMS, but you've got like 650 stakeholders, and I bet you we would get 300 different answers of what is best, because some of these are very small services. Some folks are contracting out of state for services and they're very happy with it. Some entities, like the agencies I led, Burlington and Colchester, we've always paid for our own dispatch. Since I came on the job, we've run our own dispatch centers. So why would we disrupt what is already working well? And the de facto regional centers that I mentioned, the Lamoille, the St. Albans, the Shelburne, we have systems around the state that are working well. So why would we try to engineer a big state system? That is a path. That is not the path this program has been on. And that's why we're taking a short pause here while we let a little bit of this conversation play out with GovOps and the governor's.
It seems like there's a lot of support for your leadership. And I think, maybe you have to wait till we decide which way to go, but with your leadership, I think there's a lot of people that have your back to follow it, to make it happen.
And one of the answers to the question is as far as leadership and equitably coming up with a solution is the towns I was discussing earlier, where there are 15,000 for dispatching plus some others. But for fire, they had 11 calls last year.
Yeah.
And I mean, so when you start doing the math on that, it's just, we understand that there's a base amount that you have to cover to get there. But, when you start doing the math on that and you start figuring it out through all communities, it's a big ask of a small group of people to cover the base amount when you're getting 11 calls. Now, I understand that it could be 27 calls the next year after that. You just don't have those, you don't have the luxury of determining how many calls a year you're gonna get. And ultimately, you just want somebody there to respond when you do call. But I think there's a fairer way to figure it out. And as Senator Perchlik expressed, we would love to see some great leadership with that.
All right, well, I will endeavor to do my very best and to make sure that we are very clear in a direction that, as I know it right now, the governor would like the legislature to answer the question about the provision of the service as a fundamental responsibility of government. And once that question is answered, I can start moving us towards a plan. And I would also say that I'm very sensitive as well to the small town budgeting woes. I live in a very small town, and I am aware how decisions here and here can really have an impact. So rest assured that I'm aware of the small town struggles, and we are looking to create equity across the system, not just in who pays what, but in the quality of service provision in rural Vermont versus more built areas, more developed areas. So we're trying to keep our eye on all the foul lines going forward.
Senator Birchler.
We talked about the embedded mental health workers. I have a friend that works for the Denver Police Department as a victim. I don't know if it's a victim advocate but basically she works with the police force to show up to, situations to work with the victims. And I don't know if there's anything like that in the state police.
There is not. Well, let me say this. We have victim advocates embedded in the major crime unit. So for the serious crimes, homicides, really serious crimes, we have victim advocates who respond with detectives. They are in that first wave of response to major crimes. In terms of day-to-day crimes, the property crimes, even domestic violence, other crimes like that don't result in homicide or serious bodily injury, there are victim advocates based in each of the county state's attorney's office. And there are also community-based victim advocates in terms of, the programs through the Vermont Network for Domestic Violence and Prevention of Sexual Assault. So there's also the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. So there are multiple partners that we work with, but there are not victim advocates embedded at Vermont State Police field stations.
Except, so when those that show up to like a homicide, are they state employees or?
Yes. So yes, one of them we just, in this budget, assuming the budget goes through, will be coming out of base. Historically, both positions have been grant funded. One of those grant streams is going away. So we're aware that it's going away, and that has been moved into our base budget. The other one is still grant funded, but that funding stream appears to be stable. So they are employees of the state of Vermont, and they roll out with our detectives and crime scene specialists.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I have one more question about fire safety. Years ago, there used to be concern that building projects could not move forward as fast as people would like because of the backlog of inspections that were required by fire safety, and it was a staffing issue. How are we doing on that front?
Doing quite well. I don't have the data at my fingertips on the exact average time, but we know that our permit processing time is well under 30 days. It was like 9 days at one point when I was checking in on it. And in terms of then from permitting through construction to final inspection, I don't have that data at my fingertips, but we are fully staffed in fire safety. And in last session, more responsibilities were added on that division. So we, it's sort of a division that's growing. It's growing and assuming more responsibility. But I am unaware of any complaint on slow inspection times in my tenure as deputy commissioner or commissioner.
I didn't mean to suggest that I was hearing that. I was just wondering how things were, because there's been a lot of emphasis on development of more housing and addressing the shortage, and that does usually translate into workload other places.
Oh yes, it does. I mean, we feel the ripple effects when the economy is stimulated and we're going to get lots of buildings built. Well, of course that has a impact on us, but we are fully committed to ensuring that all of the governor's goals, including more housing and other infrastructure projects, are able to move along as swiftly as possible.
And I would echo your praise for the fire and safety. And my day job is in transferring real estate properties. When we get into bigger housing complexes, we find it very accommodating to work with the state, and a lot of these towns now have the same positions, work hand in hand, and I've been very pleased with the ease of scheduling and the accommodations that fire and safety has afforded us.
Well, thank you. That's really great to hear. I'll share that back with the team.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Commissioner, for appearing this morning, and keep up the good work. And
Thank you, sir.
we'll see you later.